Ba-da-dum-bum-bum-bum.
Zach trying to get loose, he'll fire. Hey! Knocks it down! Carl Sanderholm! Garland upstairs. Oh! 6 and inside! A thunderous dunk! And Allen blocked the shot at the rim.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs Media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. Support for this podcast is brought to you by Fubo TV. Watch over 100 channels of live sports and TV for half the cost of cable. There's no contract and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com. We got a really great podcast for you guys today, and joining us, making his return, is my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. I was just saying before we went live, I know I'm getting old because I don't bounce back from jet lag like I used to. My body thinks it's around 1:15 in the morning. I'm still on London time, but you know I'm back. I'm ready, and I feel good.
You know what? Tired Carter sometimes works out really well because you have a little less patience for us, and I think that makes for good podcasting.
Listen, I had to get our boy Jimmy Longo. The Pikachu London plushie. Shout out to Team Cavs photographer Jimmy. We had to get him the plushie.
Love Jimmy. Love that so much. And you know what? Traveling is hard on the body, and that's why the NBA, with this new schedule, Carter, they dramatically reduce the amount of travel that all teams have to go through in the season. I was really interested when that schedule first launched, which obviously we'll dive into today. But I was very curious when I saw all those situations where the Cavs stay in a city, play a team twice or host a team twice over the span of a couple days. And all of a sudden it clicked for me. I was like, oh, did the NBA do this to reduce travel? And then as I'm checking other teams' schedules, I saw more and more instances of that. And I think that this is a fantastic change. This is something that legitimately got me really, really excited because not only from the wear and tear aspect, but one of the things we've talked about a bunch, and one of the reasons we felt like missing the playoffs last year was a missed opportunity, was the opportunity to prepare for the same team multiple times in a row and adjust your game plan accordingly. And I'm excited that you get, obviously it's not going to be a playoff-like intensity with those games, but you do start to get a little bit of that experience, and I think that that's a real positive for the league.
Yeah, you look at March and it really jumps out at you. You know, you have at Boston versus Boston with a Detroit home game in between, then at Miami, at Charlotte, at Brooklyn. And you know it's gonna feel like a baseball season, brother. And I like
Carter,
it.
Let me tell you, friend of the podcast, Rafa, is very excited for that week in Miami.
Oh, what? I'm sure everyone affiliated with the organization is.
Now that's a true test. 5 days in Miami is absolutely a true test. But they have another one in March against the Brooklyn Nets as well. That is going to be very interesting to see. I just think it's a really good idea. I'm interested to see if that starts to develop. Maybe if you even see some like bad blood between teams playing each other multiple times, because you don't really game plan for teams in the regular season the same way that you would in the playoffs. But when you have a 5-day stretch where you play a team twice, I have to imagine you go into a little bit more detail and you start to see some of those game-to-game adjustments. And when it's against a team like the Brooklyn Nets that the Cavs might see in the playoffs, and obviously saw in the last postseason. Obviously, you're going to have a little bit of emotion there. I believe the Toronto Raptors have one of those instances where they play the Sixers twice, and that obviously has a bit of bad blood brewing as well. I'm excited to see what this means for the regular season, and it has increased my interest for sure.
Yeah, I always like it. I get why there are some detractors. I get why it's a bit of a drag in baseball because the games are so long, and it's just okay. I guess we're gonna play the same team 4 days in a row. Like that. That is much. A lot. But like this just seems like just the right amount. I think 2 games in a row because like what's nice is if the first game does get a little chippy. The second game you're like, okay, let's go. That kind of simple little in-season narratives. I think that's what the league is, really struggling to figure out how to, consistently generate, based on, what the kind of decisions they're making with the in-season tournament that's been proposed. I think this is just another little sneaky way to, one, cut down on some travel, cut down on some pain, but also, add a little intrigue every now and again.
Yeah, and I also feel like this is completely a theory of mine, but I think when a team is not expected to do as well, and this is also just a product of not getting national games, but when you look at the schedule last season, when the Cavs don't have any national games, you don't get kind of that rest leading into those marquee matchups. And I think when some teams need to be shortchanged by the schedule makers, the ones that aren't necessarily on the marquee are going to be those teams. It's nice to see now that the schedule seems to be a lot more favorable for the Cavs. So I was looking at the total miles traveled for this upcoming season, and the Cavs are going to have the fewest.
As we should. We're in the heartland. We don't get that many advantages in the Midwest,
right?
In this league.
Obviously, geography is a big factor there. Positive residual has the Cavs with the 5th easiest strength of schedule. They have 12 games this season where they'll have a rest advantage and 10 games where they have a rest disadvantage. That seems to be a dramatic improvement in the past. I think Toronto and Atlanta are the only teams in the East that have more rest advantage games this season. And
the league's stepping in for Toronto all over again. Their fans...
I'm ready to jump on those narratives, Carter.
I know you are. That's why I said it.
And 12. Sorry to cut you off, but also 12 back-to-backs, which is tied for the fewest in the East with, once again, the Toronto Raptors, Charlotte, and the New York Knicks.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. Normally, I don't care that much about schedule, but after last year was so hard, I care a little bit more.
Most definitely. And you know what? One of the things that I also recognize, because we didn't really like when LeBron came back in 2014, you just jumped all the way to contender, and you weren't kind of in this build-up stage where, like the timing of the matchups, the ebbs and flows of the season, it doesn't matter as much, because even if you're the 4 or 5 seed, if you have LeBron in the playoffs, you're going to have a good chance to win the conference. Now it's a little bit different, right? Where you actually kind of look at the timing of this, and even last season as an example, just the scheduling anomaly that we played the Sixers 4 times after the trade deadline, where obviously they had the Ben Simmons situation prior to the deadline and then had Harden after the deadline. Like, that's a dramatically different team. Even you looking at the Celtics, how they started off slow and then were much better later in the year. Like, when you play teams really, really does matter.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So, and like some of those really hard games early on that we thought the Cavs were going to be playing turned out to not be that hard, and some of the easy games turned out to be hard. So it is, there's only so much projection you can do, but overall, I mean, you got to be excited to at least see what appears to be a survivable early game stretch if the Cavs do need to kind of get their sea legs under them with all these not new pieces, but new old pieces that they'll need to kind of integrate back in. Or at least that we expect them to need to integrate back in. Let's talk through that opening schedule, though. What jumps out at you? Obviously, road against the Raptors. I'm so excited for. I'm actually really, as a staunch believer in the Cavs-Raptors rivalry that is going to happen over the next 5 years. And you remember, I was on this early. I was very into this this potential rivalry with all the kind of connective tissue, the stylistic differences, etc. I feel like the league might agree with me. And I was very happy to get to just listen to your episode with S last week as a listener, because it was hitting all the right notes for me. But on the road against the Raptors, on the road against the Bulls, Wizards and Magic, Celtics, Knicks, Celtics again, and then a 5-game roadie pretty early in the season: Pistons, Lakers, Clippers, Kings, Warriors, knocking out one of those big West Coast road trips early. What are your early impressions of those that opening schedule? Because I think there's room to have a really nice start to the year.
I think it's a really exciting opportunity, and I'm very pleased. Like, when I look at this opening schedule, I'm very grateful and happy to see that last week the Cavs were in LA working out together. I believe everyone that's connected to the team, with the exception of Jetty Osman and Lauri Markkanen, that are competing overseas, and then obviously Colin Sexton with the contract situation. Everyone else was reportedly there in LA already working on developing that chemistry, and that's going to be really important. I think we saw it last year that the Cavs kind of doing all these mini camps and really working to develop that chemistry helped them to get off on the right foot. And there is a real opportunity when you look at those first 2 games on the road, Raptors and Bulls. If you manage to come away with wins in both of those games, you give yourself an immediate advantage when it comes to securing tiebreakers for them, which obviously we saw last year really matters when you get to the end of the season. And it also just sets the right tone. Those are teams that we kind of project to be in the same tier as the Cavs, and those head-to-head matchups matter a lot. Plus, you have the Wizards and Magic after that. Those you feel pretty good about your ability to win those games. Yeah, Bradley Beal can always go off, and
Sure.
we saw even last year that
nobody is just straight up easy to win against at this point in the league. Like, almost nobody. Everyone's like got 1 or 2 players who can go absolutely bananas.
Yeah, and if I'm putting my wine and gold homer glasses on here, I'd kind of like getting the Celtics twice early in the season because they just went on a deep playoff run going to the NBA Finals.
If there were ever a time for them to not come out super sharp,
it's typical. Like we saw it even with Phoenix the year prior, that they got off to a slow start, right? Like we saw with the Cavs teams that when you have those deep runs, sometimes it's a little tough to get up and excited for 82 games again. So if you can at least get one of those games, I feel pretty good about it. But I think when you're a team like the Cavs, and especially with how competitive the Eastern Conference projects to be, I think the mentality you have to have is, we need to take care of business every single night. We can't have drop games against teams like Orlando or Detroit or any of these other teams that should win games. You need to take care of business of those games and then do your best to split some of these tougher ones, whether it's teams that are a bit above you in the standings, which we saw the Cavs pull off some wins against those teams last year, or teams within your tier. You want to kind of at least win half of those games.
It feels like a very JB Bickerstaff type of thing to say, win all the games that you're supposed to win, split all the games that you're not sure you're supposed to win, and you might end up somewhere around 45, 50 wins.
That's the path.
That's
the vision right there.
like that. JB's such a kind of a likes to kind of boil things down to those kind of basics. I feel like I've actually heard him say something like that.
He's a man after my heart. I love those coaching cliches.
Yeah, and there is something to it. And this I think that the state of the league kind of demonstrates that the Cavs are going to have to, like, even looking at the schedule, like, this is like about as, like, you're probably not going to get like often a ton of stretches a lot lighter than this.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, the league's just super freaking good, and obviously a bunch of road games to start. Let's see here: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 out of the first 12 on the road. So that is a lot. But like, there are winnable matchups. Obviously, Sacramento's going to look to be competitive. Lakers, I would expect to be a little more competitive.
I actually think the Kings are going to be. I have a take. I think the Kings are going to have an above 500 record.
Well, I love Domantas Sabonis.
I think that's a pretty decent roster, man. Like you look at De'Aaron Fox, Kevin Huerter, Keegan Murray, Harrison Barnes, Sabonis. Like they've got guys. They've got some depth too. I can see them being competitive, and I think the Western Conference is actually going to bounce back in a real way. I don't think you're going to see teams with losing records in the play-in. But what I do think that means is that the win totals around the league might be flat. Like I don't know if there's even going to be a single 60-win team this year because it's just going to be so competitive every single night.
Well, yeah, I mean, just a reminder to everyone that a 53-win team, I think, was the 1 seed in the East.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would expect kind of similar things this year, maybe across both. Maybe you don't even have a Suns type of team. So, I think it's a very interesting opening schedule. I do think we're going to learn a lot about kind of the state of the Cavs. Because if they come out and win 8 of their first 12 or something like that,
Ooh.
Then we're really cooking with gas.
Yeah.
If they come out, have a kind of tough games against Chicago and Toronto, and then maybe drop one of those 2 should wins, then all of a sudden we're gonna go, hey, where's this sharp, scrappy team we rooted for last year? So I do think it's gonna set an early tone for the season because we talked about it. Last year was the most fun year you typically get. There were no expectations. It's all surprise. Cavs fans are going to come out and expect this team is pretty decent. Like they're expecting a 44-win team or better.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a fair expectation, right? Like, I think that should be the goal. The goal should be avoiding the play-in tournament or at the very least making the playoffs. But I think for the regular season, your goal should be to avoid the play-in tournament. And starting strong is a big part of that. We saw even last year that the Cavs performing well on that West Coast trip, and I believe they won 3 of the 5 games.
Oh, it might have been more. It was a really good trip. I remember that.
Yeah, they dropped the games against the Lakers and the Suns, but beating the Nuggets and Clippers. And I forget what the other win was there, but they performed really well, and that was a catalyst for the season. So you take care of business before that trip, and then you go out there, you have that bonding opportunity, you get some solid wins and good performances against some pretty good teams. You can really get yourself off on the right footing. So I'm excited about that.
You know what else I'm excited for?
What's that?
We're going to be on national TV, buddy.
We are.
It feels good. It's been a while.
There are 5 games on ESPN and TNT. The Lakers, Grizzlies, Pelicans, which I thought was an interesting choice. Celtics as well as the Sixers, my favorite. And then 4 NBA TV games. Clippers, Nets twice, and the Miami Heat.
I'll tell you what, man. Last year, when we kind of got flexed to national TV, that game against the Raptors, I kind of forgot how nice it is to be on national TV. The whole basketball world's talking about your team and enjoying watching your team. It's not just your little siloed experience anymore. I think we kind of came to take it for granted during the LeBron era. And I really like the idea of but you know what else I forgot about is the kind of the angstiness, the dread of they better show out. I don't want to see some people who don't even know what they're talking about calling my team fraudulent.
Yeah,
because they had one bad game on ESPN. I'm excited. I think it's going to be really fun, and I think this is a clear message from the league. Hey, we think this team is pretty legit.
Mm-hmm. If I set a line at 9.5 national games this year, Carter, would you pick the over or under? Do you think we're going to stick with these 9, or do you think they're going to get flexed into some late season games?
I think it's more likely we stick. I think you only flex for, I think I think they're going to reserve those flex games for the teams that, they thought were going to be on national TV or thought weren't going to be good and then surprised them. I think that would be my guess, but who's to say?
You never know. And when the Cavs are up there in the 1 seed and things are just cooking, maybe that creates some marquee matchups. No surprise that the Cavs aren't playing on Christmas. I don't think they're at that stage of the development yet. Although I do have a gripe. My only gripe with the schedule, Carter.
Gripe, brother.
Rivalries week. I think this is a great concept. I love it. Some of these teams are playing the multiple games during that week against the one opponent. Cavs not a part of that. And I thought, especially when you look at some of these matchups, it's like leaning into something that they think could be a future rivalry. I thought the Lonzo versus LaMelo choice is a weird one. Like I guess you're kind of capitalizing on the notoriety that those guys have. But the Cavs not being part of it, I thought that was a missed opportunity. Like that would have been a great time to schedule some games against the Hawks. The Raptors are on Rivalries Week, and a really weird choice. They put them against the Warriors. I didn't think that that's a rivalry. That's like the least talked about NBA Finals.
No way is that a rivalry. It's okay, Justin. We will, we're in the transitional period, like some of our rivalries are just live in our hearts for now,
live in my hearts and minds, my bitter little heart.
And I don't think the Cavs have a rivalry with Toronto right now. They will by the end of the year. I am sure of it. Yeah. I'll stake my limited reputation on it.
You know what? It's something we've been obsessed about for a while. I remember.
Didn't Fedor report something once about Mobley's playing Barnes? He's going to be up for it. Before one of their games last year. I think Mobley actually cares about that matchup. In a meaningful way. I think Barnes definitely cares about that matchup in a meaningful way. The styles are awesome. The quality of play is awesome. That freaking game. Again, I think that was my favorite game last year. Was the game where Toronto was just, up 6 to 10 points all game and kept trying to, throw these knockout haymakers. Cavs kept fighting it off, ended up stealing and winning, led 0.2 seconds of the game.
Yeah.
That was an awesome game. And I think I'm so sure of this rivalry, Justin. Carter, I won't be dissuaded.
I came to the realization, and my favorite game last year was definitely the win against the Bucks, where the game in Cleveland where Mobley dunked on Giannis.
Oof, that was a fun one.
And it was made even more exciting because I think that game was an NBA TV game. So there was a lot of people watching, and we had Channing Frye on the next day. And I was like, you know what? When we booked Channing, I really hope that we got this win because that would be such a signature win. What made me sad was I realized after that game, that's when the Garland back issue started flaring up. Lowry went down.
You're right.
And from that point on, I think Garland, Allen, and Mobley only got 3 games together the rest of the season. So
I think you are correct, my friend.
That was a real turning point for the season, and hopefully we get a lot more of those guys together. Because
we got to wrap the pod so I can just watch those highlights. I've been a fiend recently, Justin. I've just been trying to get my fix wherever I can. Just popping on highlights. Of random games mid-year. I threw up in the Discord. I threw the 2018 Christmas game highlights in. I'm just I miss basketball right now.
I think that was actually the 2017 one where RJ dunked on KD and all that.
I'm sorry, I said the wrong year.
It's okay. You're rusty. You're a little tired. It's all good. I've been the same way. I've been consuming highlights. You know me. Even the video of the Cavs all working out together in LA. I was looking. I was like, ooh, Isaac looks a little bit taller. He looks like around the same height as LeVert. I was doing a little bit of the height watch going on. Obviously very excited about all the Mobley highlights. What actually got me more excited about the Mobley highlights, Carter, was I was listening to the Game Theory podcast with Sam Vecini, and he had our buddy Adam Spinella on there, and they were talking about the best young cores in the Eastern Conference. And Sam was talking about how he doesn't normally get excited about highlights, but then he watched Mobley's, and he was like, oh, God, the jumper got a lot better. The form's really good. Oh, God.
I am actively choosing to not, even if the logical part of my brain says, the gather looks a little bit cleaner, and I'm actively choosing to decide that his jumper will not be one iota better next year because my heart can't take it.
Did you see the side by sides that they tweeted out of Kevin Durant?
I'm choosing to be illogical. I'm ignoring the logical part of my brain, so I don't get hyped. I'd rather just be pleasantly surprised, even because it's too much. It's too much, Justin.
You know how some people don't have to get ready when they stay ready? I don't have to get hyped when I'm always hyped. And Evan Mobley highlights are absolutely doing that for me. I can't wait to see what this offseason brings for him, for Okoro, for all of these guys.
It's just cool that like he's like, you know, if there was ever a summer to not work on your game that hard, it's this one, you know? It's the first, you know, like I think part of the reason I'm really freelancing with this take here, so let's bear with me.
Yeah, I don't like how it started, but I'm interested to see where it goes.
I wonder if part of the reason that the third year leap tends to be the biggest leap is that you finish your rookie year, you've never played 82 games in this compressed of a stretch, and you're finally able to freaking relax for a minute. So you go, and you don't, and then the next summer you're like, okay, now it's time for me to take my leap. So I at least I wonder if that's part of it. Maybe it's just physical maturity and reps. I don't know, but like it's cool to see him so actively working on parts of his game like this.
Carter, I don't think the Cavs have drafted anyone that isn't working 24/7 on their games.
To be their brand.
We've got hard workers all the time, just like our partners at Zoom work 24/7 to bring us the best connection so we can always do this podcast. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects.
Oh, that was nice, Justin.
Thank you. I was happy with that.
Zoom's never failed us. A lot of things have failed us on this podcast, but Zoom has not crashed on us once.
We failed ourselves more than anything else has failed us. Let's be honest.
Yeah, true. Well and truly. But no,
Speaking of
never
disappointments.
Zoom.
Speaking of disappointments, I think a sizable portion of the Cavs fan base kind of breathed maybe a small sigh when LeBron James last week, since we last podcasted, signed an extension with the Lakers. Obviously, this is noteworthy because there's been speculation about whether or not that a reunion could be possible. It certainly could still be possible down the road. I think, Carter, you know that I've been a little bit skeptical about the possibility of that, but I do think beyond
a real
that,
negative Nancy. Let's call it what it is.
Look, when what I was predicting would happens, I think I just call that being right rather than being a negative Nancy.
Yeah, but you were more in your feelings than you'd pretend to be. But
I was very in my feelings. Let's be honest. But I am. There's aspects that I'm excited about. I think it's obviously really exciting that we know for sure that there isn't the possibility of it not being Garland and Mobley's team for the next few years. Like I think the leaders of this team are already on the roster, and that's really exciting from a fan perspective. I do think it's also noteworthy just from a standpoint of when half the league is going to have money next offseason in free agency, another name coming off the board might change kind of the dynamics, right? Like for all free agents, anyone that's hitting unrestricted or restricted free agency next summer, there's going to be a lot of money for those guys, and the number of guys that are merit that kind of contract is dwindling. So I do think it's certainly noteworthy from that perspective as well.
Well, I think it's funny. I've said this a lot. I've invested a lot of time into rooting for LeBron to the point where I do root for the guy still. And, maybe I root for like being right about how great of a player he was in arguments. Maybe there's a bit of that selfishness. And like, I'm not sure that LA is going to put the team around him that is going to make the end of his career awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And like that kind of bums me out. It's funny. I really wasn't that bummed as a Cavs fan. I was bummed a little bit as a guy who roots for LeBron because I'm just not really a fan of their roster construction right now. I'm not sure it's going to lead to success. Now, obviously, teams have pulled rabbits out of hats before and made insane turnarounds, and sometimes it's just changing around personnel. I forget who it was. Oh, we got Noni in the background. Hi, Pupper. I forget what pod it was, but they were talking about like 8 guys who were in the rotation for the Lakers last year still don't have a job, so like maybe some of that is just gonna, naturally turn over and they'll look closer to contender status this year.
I mean, when I list the teams with cap space, the Lakers are one that's probably,
and you're not wrong,
could potentially have a max cap slot, and Anthony Davis as LeBron for the pitch. So that can turn around for sure. I could definitely see that happening.
I forget that, Russ is going to be on an expiring deal this year. So, I think there's a little bit of that. I think for the Cavs, I think it would have been like a fun thing, but like, I don't think I think your reaction to news typically, your initial gut reaction to news typically kind of betrays how you felt. And, I was in the middle of working an event for work, and I scrolled on my phone and I saw it and I went, all right. And then I moved on, which probably tells me how how invested I was in the idea.
Yeah, and from a Cavs perspective, I don't think it changes anything. Like I said this before it occurred, I think the Cavs team building has been independent of that. And if a player wants to be part of that, whether it's LeBron or anyone else, you figure that out when it occurs. But I don't think there were any moves that were held up on the possibility of him being a UFA or anything along those lines, right? Like the Cavs are building something that seems very special. It seems very sustainable. They have a lot of good options. So I don't think anything changes from that end. The other bit of league news that I want to discuss is Brooklyn making the statement that they are going to be moving forward with Kevin Durant. Obviously, this impacts the Cavs because, one, the possibility of a trade was maybe an opportunity for the Cavs to get involved as a third team, shed salary. That's something that we've talked about with any potential big moves, right? Because we know that the Cavs likely are going to need a clear roster spot at some point. But the bigger impact is the fact that the Brooklyn Nets, as currently constructed, if fully healthy, are probably a really good team. And in an Eastern Conference that is loaded up, they're going to be in that mix. They are another team that could push the Cavs theoretically closer to a play-in spot versus the secure playoff spot that we want to secure. I want to ask you, Carter, what tier do you put them in the Eastern Conference, knowing what you know today?
I am going to do... I'm going to assume the closest thing to good faith as possible, insofar as I do not think the Nets star players are going to do the Harden treatment at the end of the Houston tenure, where it's kind of not putting in a good effort on court. I think it's probably fair to say that at this point. So if
I
that
expect the same thing, to just for the record, like I think that, like, especially when it comes to KD and Kyrie, like when they're on the court, I think they really do put an effort in. And looking at it now, like the thing that stands out to me about Brooklyn is KD's missed more games the last couple of years due to injury than even Joel Embiid has, right? And Kyrie has missed sometimes, and Ben Simmons has missed some time. So health to me is the bigger factor versus investment. At least as I look at the situation.
I would agree with that, but I still think they're going to be pretty darn good. I mean, people forget that Ben Simmons should be back, Yep. And he is a very, very helpful regular season player at minimum. A real floor raiser for them. Curry should be healthier. Joe Harris should be healthier. I think they're tier 1.5, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, but you could easily talk me into tier 1 if they're healthy.
I think they have the widest range of outcomes out of any team in the Eastern Conference because, I mean, Kevin Durant is arguably the best player in the league. Probably worst case, you're
I wouldn't make that
3.
argument, but
yeah, I would have Giannis personally. I think I'd pretty comfortably have Giannis at this point, and durability is part of that equation. But I think they absolutely could be a contender, or they could be a team that's still fighting for the play-in. I think health is a major factor, but they do have a very good roster. I mean, Royce O'Neal had a bit of a down year defensively, but he still was putting up good offensive numbers.
They won 44 games with like an absolutely nightmare season. Like the Cavs,
Joe Harris should be back.
Yeah,
TJ Warren, right? Like
the Cavs dream. I think this is the probably the best way to put their talent level. The Cavs' dream season resulted in the same amount of wins as the Nets' nightmare season. Like they fell to 44 wins, and obviously the Cavs had some things that kept them down at 44.
I was about to say it was a dream season only because of how good
of
the
expectations,
first because of how good the first 2/3 were. Like I think I read recently that you on average have 3 dreams throughout the course of a night, and the Cavs had 2 really good dreams
and then a nightmare.
And one really, really rough one at the end. So,
but you get what I'm saying. This is a team whose floor is still very high, despite the fact that if they're the 7 seed again, I think that like that would be considered a low floor for them. But like relative to what Cavs fans care about, which is getting into the top 6, or winning a play-in game, they are a high floor team. And they're going to be a thorn in the side of that middle class of the league that was hoping to have them go away.
Yep, and I'll say this: from a schedule standpoint, I'm grateful that we only play them 3 times instead of 4, which we played them 4 times last year, and that 2 of those games come in late March, because that's one of those situations where if things don't go well and they have to make adjustments on the fly, or maybe there's some injuries, or these guys need to rest and have some load management, that's more likely to kind of be an advantage for the Cavs later in the season. So playing them in late March, and I think the other game we play against them is on around Christmas time. So I think that is certainly an advantage versus playing them at the start of the year, where that they're likely going to be healthy and they're going to be good. But there's a lot of swing pieces. Ben Simmons, I think, is now, with KD and Kyrie staying there, I think he's one of the biggest X factors in the league, because he was a really, really good player for a long time, but he was also a good player with the ball in his hands, and we need to see if he can adjust to a new role. He hasn't played in basically 2 years. TJ Warren has basically not played in 2 years. Joe Harris hasn't played in a year.
Yeah, they didn't exactly load up their supporting staff with more with more reliable players.
Right.
They're in for a penny, in for a pound.
And this is an example of where what we were talking about before, of go out and win the games you're supposed to win if you're the Cavs, because you need to get, just because like seeding in the NBA isn't resolved by 2 people sitting down and having a discussion about which roster is stronger, which one's built better. Like, you can have teams that maybe aren't as well suited for the playoffs go out there and perform better in the regular season and get a higher seed. We saw it even throughout the LeBron tenure. I mean, the Raptors were the 1 seed and the Cavs swept them in the second round, right? Like, going out there and performing. Let's be those tryhards. Let's be in that team that doesn't have off nights, or very rarely has off nights, and takes care of business, because I think that's what's going to be required in the Eastern Conference this year. Because when I was talking last week to S about kind of my top top 2 tiers in the Eastern Conference, that was 8 teams, and now it's 9 teams long. So somebody is going to be in that second play-in tournament, and that would absolutely be one of the worst case scenarios for the Cavs.
Yeah, you don't want to have that kind of high high variance outcome, which the play-in just is. I think the Cavs were better than the Hawks all year, and guess who made the playoffs?
Yeah. They were better. Yeah, they were better than the Raptors for a good portion of the year, and then it fell apart towards the end. So getting off on good footing really would make a big difference. I winning that first game against Toronto in particular would really make me happy.
Boy, do I want it.
Carter, did you see how they start their season? Speaking of tough schedules to start the year.
No, I did not, but I'm pulling it up right now for our faithful listeners.
They start by playing the Cavs. After that, they go to Brooklyn on the Friday. The next night, they travel to Miami to play Miami again. Then Miami on Monday. Then Philly. Then Atlanta. That's that is not a gentle start to the season. So if the Cavs go out there and
at
get
Dallas, then a home and home against Chicago. I mean, like that. There's one little respite here in November, but my God, it's almost mid-November by the time they have a couple easy games.
Yeah, and their schedule is very front loaded, but you want to put that distance between Toronto, right? Like even though there's some tough games, like the thing I find is any time I look at any team's schedule, I'm like, wow, there's not a lot of easy games because
there aren't a lot of easy games.
Point.
There just aren't any.
Before we jump into the last topic I had for today's podcast, just want to note Chris Fedor had a small update on the Sexton situation, just saying that, saying that there are no real updates right now, but that the discussions have not been contentious. I think people can kind of figure that out by the fact that there's not fighting in the media or anything like that. But what I did want to get into, Carter, and one of the things that I was kind of chewing on for the last week, after seeing Lauri Markkanen put up 42 points, 9 boards, and 3 steals in an overtime win against the Ukraine, I kind of have been thinking about something Fedor actually said on our podcast, and I think he's went on to say it on his as well, that right now Lauri is the closest thing to a fourth member of the core that the Cavs have. And to me, that kind of spurs the question of, what do you, Carter, do you think Lauri becoming a long-term option for the Cavs? What do you think that looks like? Because it's not something that I've thought about a whole lot. Like I can see him sticking around for a long time. I think he worked really well and I was pleased with him last year. But for him to kind of reach an apex outcome with the Cavs, what form does that look like to you?
I think it is, going from a high volume solid 3-point shooter to a high volume good 3-point shooter. I think it is being able to play the 4 without tanking the team's defensive lineups, because the harsh reality is, if you're playing with defenders like Isaac Okoro and Jared Allen flanking you at the 3 and the 5, the defense should be really good. You're not being asked to do too much. So a little bit of that. I don't know if the playmaking is ever going to be there, like as a passer. I mean, Lowe's talked about that a few times with him, of like, you always just want him to see a little bit more than he does for you want the field to be a little bit better than it is. But I think those are the two things that, like, if you ask me, like, what are the most, like, what are the two outcomes that seem feasible? Those are the two that seem feasible to me. If he is a 40% 3-point shooter, and also just is tall and moves his feet well and isn't in the wrong spot on defense when he's playing the 4, when he doesn't have Tower City, covering his butt, that seems like the outcome that gets you there. And if he gets there, then yeah, he probably moves. That probably still doesn't put him at the the near star tier. I still think he is very helpful role player in that. But the difference between being a very helpful role player in the regular season and very helpful role player in the playoffs is it's an enormous gulf. And I think that is the way I kind of see it getting there.
Now, my follow-up question is, do you see that working out at the 3 or the 4?
I just think the 3 thing, it is so specific in the lineups that it works. I don't see it working with any paradigm other than Evan and Jarrett. So, and while Evan remains our primary backup 5, there are only so many minutes those two are going to play together.
Right.
So there are even less minutes to play Lauri there. And, if you want to get Lauri his appropriate minutes, he's going to have to play some backup 4. So, I just don't think the minutes Jenga works for him to live as a full-time 3 unless the Cavs make other roster decisions and reinforce in other, parts of their front court to make sure that works. And that's a lot of work to accommodate Lauri Markkanen. When, I don't think asking him to, get a little sharper on defense and use his, existing tools, it seems like an easier ask.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the things we'd like to do in the podcast is look at our biases and figure out why we feel that way and kind of explore that a bit. And with Lauri, I always thought of him when he was brought in as, the backup 4, that he can play, still around starters minutes. I don't really care about who starts and who comes off the bench, but he can play around starters minutes off the bench, splitting time with Mobley and Allen, maybe 16 minutes with each. Right there, you have 32 minutes, and those guys can play another 16 with each other, and you divvy up the 4 and 5 minutes. But obviously, Kevin Love playing a lot better kind of changed the equation. Lauri working at the 3 changed the equation a little bit. And I was just trying to think of, what does it look like for Lauri to work out at the small forward position? What does it look like to kind of still pan out, but in a way different than what I envision? And I actually came up with a little bit of a comp, a player comp and situation comp that I think would be the avenue to Lauri really working out with the Cavs. And it's Tobias Harris.
It's an interesting take. I saw, it's funny. We didn't talk through this comp before we started recording. But I think I saw you starting to workshop it a little bit in the Discord.
As I often do.
As you often do. And it's an interesting take, right? Like, Tobias Harris is this, maybe a little bit high on the pay scale.
More of a 4 than a 3, but can play the 3, right? In certain lineups. And
especially when flanked by an elite defensive big.
And it worked really well with Embiid and Simmons, right? Where they can kind of guard the 5 and the 4, and Tobias would work at the 3. And I think for Lauri, what I'd like to see is, knowing he's going to be playing minutes at the 3, to see the improved footwork, the improved mobility, and stuff that will help him at the 3, but also really help him on the defensive end of the floor when he has to flex over to the power forward position, right? Like, I think having him as an option, no matter what the roster construction looks like, having the option of playing him at the 3 at times is something that's beneficial. Like, we still don't know how that's going to look in the playoffs. We don't know if teams are going to be able to attack that in the playoffs. I think there's reason to believe that they can, because it is unconventional and it's not his natural position. But then there's also reasons to believe that it won't work as well, because as we saw a million times when teams tried to target that, it's pretty easy for either Evan or Jared to switch over him, or even for him to kind of just stay in front of his man, be 7 feet tall and long, and kind of bother them, because if they do get by, that help defense is going to be there. So I am interested to see if that off season of preparing to play at the 3 has some benefits, even on the defensive end at playing at the 4, because if you're looking at the Tobias Harris mold, like, that was someone before the Cavs took the step forward last season that you and I had even talked about, of, hey, this could be an interesting target maybe for expiring contracts, to play the 3, even though he's more of a 4, but he's someone that can space the floor, that you can kick it out to. You can kind of get him running to the basket a little bit. He's not really going to bring any real creation, but he at least can eat some innings and give you production. And I think when you look at Lauri down the stretch last season, averaging like 17 points per game, shooting or 39% from 3, like that's the kind of stuff that could really make a difference and lighten the load for the Cavs on the offensive end of the court.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because it's not it's not exactly the most popular player probably among Philly fans, but imagine Tobias Harris with less pressure on him because of contract situations and all that fun stuff. All of a sudden, you just have like a pretty helpful role player who can sometimes be more. Lauri was shooting the cover off the ball in that first half against Atlanta, and was really making a legitimate impact. So I think it's an interesting, and frankly, I'll say it, it's a good comp. Now I think that the same things that kind of hold Tobias back apply to Lauri. But yeah, I like it, Justin. Yeah. Now the one difference is Lauri does not have the bully ball post-up game that Tobias has. That's the one thing. Lauri can't really dribble, can't really self-create.
And the implication of that is, I think when you look at a roster construction standpoint, when he's playing at the 3, having more than one creator at the 1 and 2 is almost essential. Like, Darius Garland's obviously going to be the 1 in that situation, but I think you have to have a Karis LeVert out there.
I don't know if that's that essential, buddy.
I think you have to have either Levert or Sexton or Okoro taking a step forward as a ball handler. I think you have to have multiple guys that can dribble. Like I think over the course of 48 minutes, you might be able to get away with some minutes with an Ochai Agbaji out there, especially because those two can bring spacing. But I think when you get to the playoffs where teams are able to really kind of hone in on a single ball handler, like even looking at what Portland had to go through with Dame, the way that teams would trap and get the ball out of his hands, you need to have that outlet, I think, when you have Lauri at the 3 to generate some offense to even get the drive and kick going when teams help off of Darius a bunch. But maybe looking at the Tobias Harris model, you're able to get away with it a little more if you have a big that can generate some offense. And obviously, Evan Mobley's potential growth could alleviate the need for that second ball handler. But I do think in a perfect world, you do need to have those two ball handlers at the 1 and 2.
Yeah, maybe you're right. I mean, again, the playoffs kind of, or the play-in tournament was such a small sample size, but I thought the Cavs were were able to get good looks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Karras was starting at the 2 there.
Yeah, I get that. But like, I don't know. I think that starting lineup, the numbers bore out that the starting lineup they had most of the year when they were healthy was really, really effective.
Yeah. I'm talking more so about it as we continue to take those next steps, and if Lauri continues to be a starter or a really significant member of the rotation, which I think at this point I'm kind of assuming that moving forward, just because he seems to fit. Like the guys seem to like him on the team. Like he really, like, I was impressed by his level of buy-in throughout last season. I think a lot of the frustrations that Chicago fans had in the past, like maybe we had some of that when he wasn't shooting as well early in the year, but I remember those conversations where like he's really competing on defense, he's attacking the rim, he's doing all the little things and giving effort that help make you feel more comfortable about the nights where his shot isn't as hot. And he had a lot of really big shots in the fourth quarter of games last season as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I can probably be accused of thinking of Lauri as too much of a finished product. He is still young.
Yeah.
And again, I don't really. Was
that a Finnish pun?
It was not actually. I'm just I'm just that freaking clever. So I think there is a degree of again, like, players like this typically get better very, very slowly along the margins as they get older. And, I think that he's not that far away from a 16-game player if he's not one already.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing his growth. I think what we saw towards the end of last season is something that he can build off of. And, whether it's coming off the bench long term, whether it's continuing to start at the 3 and kind of staggering him throughout the rotation, I think there's a lot of ways for this to pan out. But I thought it was at least an interesting conversation. And I'd be really interested to hear from our fans and listeners as well. If you guys want to tweet at us or email us your thoughts on Lauri and how he can fit into the future, I'd be interested to have some feedback, because I'm bored and I'm itching for Cavs content, Carter.
I couldn't agree more, man. I'm getting thirsty.
We're about a month from training camp. September is just around the corner, man. I think we've only got the one podcast left until it's September, and then we are in a basketball month, and it's going to be a really fast wrap up.
Oh man, let's get there, man. I'm getting through my busy month of work. Early September is going to be pain for me.
Well, if you need a break, we've already learned that you run away from the grind, as S so eloquently told us.
That's me.
Always running from that grind, never looking to work, but we love you anyways.
Thanks,
and
buddy.
We also love all of our listeners. Big thanks to everyone tuning in live on YouTube. If you want to support the podcast, you can like and subscribe, click the notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast, you can leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of the Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of that review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.